episode, Dr. Nadine reveals how trauma bonding traps women in toxic relationships and how to break free. Her own story was turned into a blockbuster movie, but the truth was far darker. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Women Winning Divorce, the podcast helping successful women navigate divorce with dignity so you can protect yourself, your children, and your assets. I'm Heather Quick, founding attorney at Florida Women's Law Group, where women win at life.
This week we had Dr. Nadine on the show, and we had a really informative conversation about how trauma bonding keeps women trapped in toxic marriages, the warning signs to look for, and the power imbalance that makes leaving so difficult. She also reveals how women can break free and truly heal. I hope this episode is valuable to anyone who might be listening. Stay tuned for the full episode. Welcome to this week's episode of Women Winning Divorce. I'm Heather Quick, owner and attorney at Florida Women's Law Group. Today, Dr. Nadine Macaluso, also known as Dr. Nay, is joining us. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist, has a PhD in somatic psychotherapy, a science that bridges traditional psychotherapy with the body's wisdom. Today, Dr. Nay and I will be discussing how trauma bonding keeps women trapped in toxic marriages and the warning signs to look for, the power imbalance in abusive relationships and why it makes leaving so difficult, and how women can break free from trauma bonds and reclaim financial and emotional independence after divorce. Welcome, Dr. Nay.
Thank you so much for having me, Heather. Happy to be here.
Well, I am really excited to have you here. Love your book. We're going to get into so much today. We're going to do our very best to fit it all in one episode, but I have a feeling we'll be doing an encore already because there's so much good stuff to talk about. I'd love it, Dr. Nay, for our listeners, if you would share a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so my journey here was a bit bumpy, and it goes way back when I was 22. I was modeling in New York City, and I met my ex-husband, Jordan Belfort, the Wolf of Wall Street, right? So I had no idea what was going to happen when I walked into that house where he had a party, but if you've seen the movie, you know it changed my life forever. And so we had the quintessential trauma bond, unbeknownst to me, right? I didn't know. Nobody was talking about that back then.
Right.
And very, very turbulent, dysfunctional marriage filled with drugs and greed and coercion and abuse for a good 8 years. And then I left him in my early 30s. And I moved to California, met my second husband, and started a career of becoming a therapist because I knew that therapy had helped me so much when I was with him. I don't think I would have survived the marriage, honestly. And hence I became a therapist.
Wow, that is a great story because, you know, your story and then now getting the education combined with your experience, I'm sure it's amazing what you can do to help women in similar situations. Now, let's talk about in the forward of your book, Run Like Hell. What a great name. By the way, great title. Love it. Christine Hammond writes, if your Cinderella story has become a nightmare, empathy is not enough. And you need someone who has experienced what you have. And maybe let's talk a little bit about that for our listeners and why that's so important.
Yeah, so, you know, I do have an interesting combination of going through that horrible experience of a trauma bond and then going through it publicly for the whole world to see, right? So, I mean, which is challenging. Of course, it was very challenging because it was hard enough to live through a Greek tragedy and then to have it exploited for the whole world to see was painful. But then when you combine that with all the years of education that I have, getting my master's and my doctorate, it really gives me a very special mix of being an expert in the field because I experienced it personally, you know, collectively in the world, and then professionally.
And, you know, because we've talked about the trauma bond, let's just start there for our listeners. Could you unpack that a little bit? Like, tell them, what does that mean?
Yeah.
A lot of them might not know.
Yeah. So a trauma bond is a toxic dysfunctional relationship between two emotionally attached people. Now, it can be between lovers. That's the way I write about it. It could be with boss and employee. It could be between a parent, adult, child, friends. But what makes it toxic is that one of the people in the relationship, or the way I write about it, the lover, wants power and control over their partner. And so that's what makes it different because, you and I become friends. We're equals. I don't want power over Heather. Heather doesn't want power over me. And so that's what happens in a trauma bond. And then I write about the two conditions it has to have.
Mm-hmm.
A trauma bond, which is the power imbalance.
And like for those kind of things, I mean, sometimes are there any warning signs? I mean, it can happen, I would imagine, before you know it. And you didn't know that's what you were getting into.
Yeah, there are warning signs. And the warning signs, and I'm sure, if you're on the internet, you've heard the term love bombing. So when you first meet somebody, if they're very intense and fast-paced and obsessed with you right away, and you're their soulmate after 2 weeks, and they're texting you 10 times a day, and even though that might feel nice, I always say if it feels too good to be true, it probably is.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are other signs too. If the person is very grandiose and very larger than life and almost like too charismatic, which is hard because we've been taught that our lovers should be these Prince Charming, charismatic guys, and then the third one there's two other ones that are very simple. If they say all my exes are crazy, are they all crazy? And then the other one is if you try to set a boundary with them or set a limit with them and they go nuts.
Yeah, that is right. And then instead of apologizing for them and excusing that, that's the hard thing, right? I'm sure for many of your clients and same like mine, they're like, yeah, the signs were there, but I wasn't paying attention. It's only in retrospect that now I see them.
Yeah. And the thing is that you have to remember the love bombing is a manipulative tactic. So it's primarily designed so you don't see the red flags.
Yeah. Right. And you feel good and appreciated and adored.
Right. So you're going to look past all the little things that seem controlling or too much, or your gut says, because maybe, your oxytocin, your dopamine, all those feel good hormones are going to be popping.
Mm-hmm. Now, in your relationship, your ex-husband really pushed you to get married quickly. Isn't that true?
Very true. Yes.
And is that a typical thing that you might see?
I think that's the tricky thing, right? Is that we're looking for this exact science, but as we know, people in relationships are so complex.
Right.
So in this instance, wanting me to get married right away. First of all, I didn't want to. That wasn't part of my value system. And so I had to self-abandon my values to stay connected to him. And that's a problem. And now in retrospect, I know he wanted me to do that so he'd have control over me.
Right.
I just thought, he just loves me so much. But no, I wanted to literally, I was an object for him to control.
And, do you think most people know early on maybe that this type of person, is dangerous for them? Do you think there are these signals that our body does let us know that? I do think that there are signals. I did a video about this, a big one that I did, and on Instagram or TikTok, both of them maybe. And it's one of my most popular videos because I talk about when he asked me to get married and we're in his like big fancy, Ferrari Testarossa. We're in Brooklyn, my favorite fast food restaurant, Rolling Roaster, and he pulls out this big, beautiful 5-carat diamond, emerald cut diamond, and he says, "Will you marry me?" And I said yes, but literally inside my body went, uh-oh. And I just was like, ignore. So I do think that there are signs, but again, we're not taught about to trust our gut intuition. And there's a scientific reason why we have it because of the vagus nerve. And it's a nerve that comes out of our skull and goes like in the front of our body into our viscera. And it's
telling us if things are safe or dangerous. And then it's going to come back up to our brain. But, 25 years ago, I didn't know that. And I certainly didn't think that, I didn't believe in myself enough to listen to myself.
And, and I think that's an important thing for our listeners, because that's just, a lot of human nature. And I think a lot of women, discount that because they want to be polite, or, maybe that would be unreasonable, right? Everybody would be so happy to have, this engagement. What am I thinking? Now, what I do want to talk about when you felt safe enough to leave, because I think that's a real issue, because you probably identified clearly before you left, you needed to leave. You wanted to leave, but it's not that simple for women in these relationships. It wasn't for you either. And what would you say for our listeners? Like, one, how did you get to that point, and things that, you advise people to do?
No. I mean, the research shows that first of all, it takes a woman 4 to 7 attempts to leave. And that when a woman is going to leave, it's the most dangerous time for her. So I take that very seriously. And back then, I was married to this very rich, powerful man. So I was afraid he's going to say, I'm the drug addict. He's going to say, I'm a bad mom. Like, he's going to try to take kids from me. I was terrified of that. But when I got very lucky, he got arrested. So it was clear, you're bad and she's good. And he had an ankle bracelet. So I was like, okay, this is my window. I have this window. And so most people, their exes don't get arrested. So I mean, their husbands don't get arrested. I mean, some do because of restraining orders or whatever.
Right.
What I say to anybody, first of all, if you want to leave, if you have radical acceptance, okay, I'm in a trauma bond. It's very hard, first of all, to accept that.
Okay.
Good for you that you're accepting it. The second thing is, don't ever let them see you coming. You cannot tell somebody that wants power and control over you, hasta la vista, baby.
Right.
They're not going to take that. They're not just going to be like, yeah, here's half the money. Let's be normal with the children and divorce. So you can't let them see you coming, and you have to strategize. I'm sure you work with this all day long and plan behind the scenes.
And a lot of times, though, one, the women may not recognize it for what it is. And frankly, since I started this podcast that I've learned so much more. Like, it instinctually, when I've been representing so many clients, like, something's wrong, something's off with them. This is not a good relationship. But now the research, the words are readily available to help understand that. But so often women are like, oh, I just feel like I should tell him. And it's like, no, they wouldn't tell you. And, make sure you've got a plan, money. Like, they are probably not going to take it well.
No credit cards, bank accounts in your name. Know where all your personal documents are, right? Have access to them. A lot of women, if they've been financially dependent upon them and experience financial abuse, that even gets trickier, right? Get a little job outside, go to Target, get gift cards to kind of stack. You really do have to plan this and do it strategically. And I think that, and because if you don't, it can go really bad.
Absolutely. And then, you're leaving a bad situation, but now it's gotten even worse, and you're without resources, and then he may retaliate, and now it's just gotten even worse.
Yeah.
Now that you've been divorced many years now, right? Almost 10 or 10 years, close
Longer
to
than that, so over 20.
Longer than that, over 20 years. Now, did the two of you ever make amends?
The thing about a pathological person is they don't really have remorse, empathy, or compassion. That's part of what makes them pathological. So I don't think we ever made amends. I moved to California with my children, and he came out 2 years later in California, and I was very nice to him.
Okay.
Remember, because he got arrested, he was much more humble.
I'm sure. Right.
And I'm not the type of person that would ever, as long as he's being loving and safe with my children, I would never use my children as a weapon.
Okay.
No, I would never do that. And I didn't do that. And so we got along very well. I wouldn't say we made amends, but we got along okay for the children.
And now he wrote this book, right? And, totally about y'all's life, which then got turned into a movie. How did that affect you?
Yeah, that was luckily I've been in therapy my whole life. So I've been in therapy for 25 years. People are like, why are you so normal? I'm like 25 years worth of therapy. Because it was very upsetting, of course. The
Mhm.
book was one thing, and I was like, this didn't happen. Why are you writing it like this? And I mean, it's his narrative. He gets to write it however he wants. I mean, I never threw water in his face. I mean, I should have, but a lot of it didn't happen, but a lot of it did happen. And so it was very challenging, but I, like with anything, I let myself feel my feelings, I process them, and then I move on. And with the movie, then I was like, oh my God, now it's going to be made into a movie. And because I thought, like, oh my God, I rebuilt my life, this is done. But I do this, and I work with this with my patients. You have to do the steps of healing, and we're always in a process of healing, I believe. But then also you have to surrender. Like, I just surrendered into God, and I was just like, this is bigger than me, and well, I'm not going to fight Paramount and Martin Scorsese. So I just made a conscious choice to surrender.
Yeah. Now the movie grossed over $500 million. Did you see any of that?
No, I walked away from my marriage with no money, and
Mm.
I didn't take a penny from the movie.
Wow.
No,
That, and you did it. And
and
now look at you, because I think very many women, particularly at that level
yeah.
of income, would just be like, there's no way. I can't do it.
For me, again, it was blood money. He had stolen or gotten it. It was ill-gotten gains. So why would I want that? That to me
Mhm.
is terrible, terrible karma. And I was young. I was 32. And it was scary. I mean, I had so much fear around that, but he had tortured me so much.
Mm.
It didn't matter. I just wanted to be free.
Free. Because freedom, that's huge. Free.
Freedom and have peace. And I didn't care. That was worth $1 billion to me. And I was naive and dumb, probably, but I don't know. I just had faith. My name, Nadine, means hope. And so I think I'm just in general a very positive, optimistic individual.
Well, yeah, and maybe naive, but you had to get out. And I think that's really important. Your freedom,
Yeah,
because you're in a relationship with someone who doesn't want you to have any freedom, that freedom really becomes priceless at that point.
priceless.
Now let's talk about your book encourages women to enter the unknown territory of healing to become thrivers.
Mhm.
Let's go into that a little bit. What is that?
Yeah, so here's the thing, we know we need to leave the trauma bond, and we know we have trauma symptoms, but how do we heal? And so I've really come up with my own method of healing, uh, really using a lot of psychoeducation, a lot of experiential interaction, assessments, worksheets, um, just tons of things to help people heal. And we don't know how it's going to emerge, but we can take the footsteps forward. And I believe if you intentionally want to heal, the research shows that women that have experienced intimate partner violence, 75% of them go on to experience post-traumatic growth. And so then they can thrive.
Which is awesome. Now, let's talk about this, that, once you're in that trauma bond relationship, why is it important to label things like that, or a pathological love relationship? Because
Yeah.
you can talk about that.
Yeah, the reason why words matter so much is because when you're in a trauma bond and you're being manipulated and gaslit and blamed for everything, there's a lot of mind games going on. There's a lot of mind control. So you really lose control over your mind, and you have a big loss of self. And you have cognitive dissonance, which is the confusion of, is he good or is he bad? Am I crazy or is he crazy? Is this relationship?
Right.
So there's so much internal confusion that when I start to label things and name them and offer so much psychoeducation, it all starts to unravel. Oh, wait, I was being gaslit. No, I did see that girl's number on his phone. That was true, right? I did sign financial documents I shouldn't have, that weren't in my best interest. And so it's to bring reality to their brain and to their perception, because their
Okay.
perception has been wiped out.
Mm.
So the naming it to tame it really helps them start to organize it in their brain and come out of the fog.
And so when you name it, it it actually has a physiological effect on your brain.
Yes. Yes.
And then that can help you then categorize that, like you said, and then now you at least know what you're dealing with, as opposed to, did this really happen? Is this right? What am I doing?
Correct. Yeah, because cognitive dissonance, which I spend a lot of time in my book, is a real horrible symptom, to be confused and not know which way.
And let's talk a little bit about the cycle, right? Because you talk about that trauma bond relationship has two elements, I should say, intermittent abuse and then power imbalance. Let's talk about the intermittent abuse, because I think that's really important for you to unpack for us.
Yeah, so that's the behavioral pattern that the pathological lover embodies. And so 70% of the time they're cruel, controlling, abusive, disparaging, they betray you. But 30% of the time they're loving, kind, generous, and helpful. And so those two behavioral experiences that they exhibit create very extreme feelings in us, because usually the behaviors are extreme. They're like really good or really bad. It's not really middle of the road. So it creates extreme feelings inside of us. And that's actually the bond that happens in the trauma bond, because the research shows that animal trainers that use intermittent reinforcement, the animals bond to the trainer 230% more than if the trainer just used straight kindness. So when I read that research, I was like, oh my God, that makes so much sense, because you never know what's coming.
Okay.
And so when they're cruel and abusive, but then the nice part comes, you're like, oh, there he is again. That's who he is. You start to tell yourself, I say hope is the hook. So that intermittent reinforcement is really what keeps you hooked.
Because do you think that we are, in our nature, humans, or maybe just women, hopeful, believe the best in people? Like there's something about the way we are that's what we believe is who he really is, not the other part.
Yeah. We're wired for connections. We're social beings. We need connection. A baby cannot form without the mother and face in front of it, right?
Right.
So, and I think women are taught to be, conditioned to be very relational. And also, biologically, we have to be. We raise children if we choose, right? So I just think, at least I could never imagine that somebody that said they would love me would treat me like that.
Right. It doesn't make sense. Talk about cognitive dissonance. That's where you're trying to figure that out.
Yeah, I mean, I might be imperfect and do stupid things in relationships, but I don't intentionally want to control them. And I don't intentionally want to hurt anybody if they disappoint me.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the power imbalance, because, we started out when we talked about, that desire to just fully control you. So why is that so hard to leave?
So hard to leave because with the power imbalance, usually the pathological person has the power and they will exploit that power. And they gain power slowly over time through coercive control, like belittling, disparaging, micromanaging, stalking, threatening, intimidating, until all of a sudden you're like, where'd all my power go? Or maybe if they have more resources, right, they have power. And so what I say is this pathological lover will use, harm, exploit, and betray anybody to get their needs met for money, power, pleasure, and status. And they abuse the power imbalance. And,
again, that's something, it happens over time, slowly, to where all of a sudden you probably wake up one day and you're like, what is going on? That's right. I don't have the power to make any decisions, but I didn't realize it because it just builds.
Because in the beginning, usually, like I say, it's usually equal, but that coercive control, Dr. Ramani says, is death by 1,000 cuts. We're used to thinking about intimate partner violence as one big physical incident. You call the police.
Yeah.
That's not what it is anymore. It's much more psychological and manipulative now and emotional.
Yeah. And it just builds over time and this crazy thing. Now, let's talk about some of the phases. of
Yeah.
trauma bonding, because you identify that, and I think that's great. I want to kind of understand that, and I know our listeners do as well.
Yeah, so as I mentioned in the beginning, there's that, I call it love conning, right? They're starting to con you. They're hunting for you, and it's the sweet seduction phase where the love bombing happens. They start to twin with you, like, I love sushi, you love sushi, you love tennis, I love tennis. They start to really mirror you. And you
Okay.
think, oh my God, I met a unicorn here. Like
Right.
this,
Yeah. Your soulmate, right? Yeah.
hey, this is unbelievable. And so that's in the beginning, but then, so I call that person Romeo, but then the mask starts to fall and then Dirty John shows up. And then you're in the trauma vortex where the coercive control starts, the micromanaging, the belittling, the cheating, the lying, the gaslighting. And you're like, where's Romeo?
Yeah.
Where'd Romeo go? And it's really hard because if you don't know about this and you don't understand that people are like this, you just have no point of reference for it.
Right. Well, and that leads to the cognitive dissonance, right? Because you're just like, what? It doesn't make sense, because this is not how I don't want to use maybe the word normal, but yes, a normal human being are in our experience and our expectations. This is not that behavior. This is not normal behavior. No. Are they aware of it? What they're doing, do you think?
Interesting thing is that a true personality disorder is egocentric, meaning that they're just like, this is just who I am. So, I mean, I don't know. They are aware of it, but they're not aware of it. Like, this is also just who they are. This is how they operate and move through the world. And they think everybody else is like them, so they rationalize it. However, I do believe that on some level they do know, because they can turn it off and on so quickly. So with you at home, they can be abusive. You go out in public and they're like, hey, what's happening? Oh my God, that's a gorgeous shirt you're wearing, right? So they can turn it off and on. So I do think that on some level they're in control of it.
Okay.
But not all the time. Again, it's complex.
Yeah, I believe it. It is. It sounds so complex. So then after that, like, trauma vortex, you talk about the last straw.
Yeah.
And there's always a last straw. What could that be? Examples?
Yeah. So the last straw is when you realize, okay, this is it. What am I doing in here? This is insanity. I used to call my relationship a merry-go-round of insanity. I'd go up, I'd go down. I'd go up, I'd go down. And so, you realize you don't have a self anymore. You might fear for your physical safety. You might fear for your children. You might have just had it. You might build confidence outside of the relationship. But usually there is a moment where you just say no more.
Mm-hmm. And that's usually when, hopefully, you're then make a plan. You're ready. You recognize this is not normal. I got to get out. And then you start to come up with a plan. Now, you did have several stories in your book. I was wondering if we could talk through Carrie, the woman Carrie, because, she was one of your patients and wanted to bring her husband in for counseling. And so tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So normally, when you're a therapist, you have to either the individual or the couple. So I don't usually allow that. Maybe I'll allow the husband to come in once, but then they can't come in again, because then it just blurs the lines, right? Because you're either treating the couple as the unit, they're the unit, or the person's the unit. So I let him come in once, and you could just see how suave he was. Really wanting to win me over, to get me to like him. And that's the tricky thing. And I talk to a lot of therapists about this, is that you have to be very aware when this type of person, this couple, comes into couples counseling.
Right.
Because a lot of times the woman is afraid to talk, even though she's in therapy, because she's afraid she'll get it afterwards. But they could be the most charming people that are trying to win you over. And then the victim gets re-traumatized.
Right. Because now they're like, now my therapist is on his side.
Right. That wasn't my story with her. Right. But, yeah.
But let's talk about her, because she was feeling like she was stuck in her career, right? And you were trying to help her with that. But then what were you able to help her realize was really the problem?
Yeah, well, she felt like she was stuck in a career, so I think she brought him in to try for me to explain to him that she wanted a new career, right? But that's really not why she came to therapy. I mean, that's what she said she came to therapy for. But
Right.
she left therapy, and then a year later she came back, and she started to talk to me about all the alcoholism, all the punching of the walls, all the abuse. He would stay out all the time, not come home, and it ended up that he was gay in my vignette, right? Because of course,
Right. Yes, the story.
yeah, I think I don't know. Now I might be mixing them up.
No, this is the one because she found that on her phone. She found like a homosexual dating app.
Yeah,
And she went through his phone, and she was worried about not being safe. He was, abusive.
safe and so there was so much lies and betrayal going on there. I mean, he's abusive, he's punching walls, he's drinking too much, he's staying out, cheating on her. He also wasn't she was doing everything in the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
The home, the kids, working, but she does finally leave.
And what helped, I think what you wrote in the book is when she really realized her daughters were in danger, then maybe that was her last straw. Like she was like, okay, I can't hide.
Right. The girls were fighting in the back of the car, and he threw one of them in the trunk.
Yeah. Oh, right.
I mean, that's sometimes the extreme that you have to see for it to snap you.
Right. And I think I've seen that often, and not always necessarily these kinds of relationships, but a similar pattern, like where there's that last thing. And oftentimes what I've seen with women is they may not have left for them, but now their children, now they're very concerned as far as what's going to happen, and they're willing to be afraid to risk leaving for their children more so than themselves.
Yeah, that's very common. That's very, very, very common.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's and listen, and if you don't have children, then you have to leave, of course, for yourself. No, I'm sure you see that, quite often.
Well, and I think that, let's talk about children growing up in that kind of relationship. Is not healthy.
No. The research shows that you're much better off having the children raised in a calm, peaceful home than in a home where the mother is afraid, where the mother can't have a voice, where the mother is being coerced and abused. Because children do what we do, not what we tell them to do.
Mm-hmm. And I'd love for your take on this, because this is something that over the years that I have heard. So they recognize the unhealthy situation, and they don't want to leave because they feel like they are the intermediary between the children. They feel like they're the buffer.
Yes.
And they're worried because then he'll have time with the children that they won't be there.
Yes.
I would love to know how do you address that for a woman feeling that way?
Is that, first of all, children have to be safe, right? So if he's live and all that sort of stuff, then of course, hopefully the courts would handle that. They don't always, but what I say to people and what I've said to myself is, you had children with this person. There's something bigger in the world operating than you, right? Divine ordinance, whatever we want to call that, God, goddesses, whatever spirituality anybody has. And we don't get to play God with our children. Mm-hmm. And if you did have children with this man and they are safe enough, right? I'm going to say that.
Yeah, right.
It's your work to learning how to tolerate dealing with that, because you can't control what goes on in their house.
Right.
Just like you can't control what goes on in your house. And I remember, when I first left my ex, and I love holidays and I do them like crazy person. And I remember sitting there with him and him saying to me, I want the kids for Thanksgiving. And I thought to myself, I must really hate you to give up my kids for Thanksgiving. But this is what I have to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because I want to get divorced. There are repercussions to getting divorced that we have to face. And I'm not saying it's easy to tolerate it. Mm-hmm. And every case is very specific, but That's the dad. That's the dad. That the court's going to say.
That's what they're going to say, unless there's really, they think they're physically going to be in danger.
Yeah. And so it's our work then to learn how to tolerate those complex emotions and send our kids over there in the most resourced way. And a lot of times they do use the children and manipulate them. But my friend, Dr. Christine Coccioli, you should have her on. She works with mothers on when the children come home, how to deal with that.
Mm-hmm. Right, because it's even in not this situation, it's difficult on children, and counseling is helpful because they are going from two different households. But in these extreme situations, real important. And then you just take it day by day. Yes. Well, this has been a great conversation. I can't believe we're almost done. But Nadine, before we go, can you impart on our listeners what you've learned about women and their resilience throughout your career and experience?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I always say the women that are in these situations are the most creative, amazing, brightest people I've ever met, because to survive that, it takes a lot. I mean, it's not for the faint at heart. I mean, women are just amazing. I mean, they're so resilient. All the women I've worked with, they're so open, they're so adaptive, they want to change, they want to grow, they want to do what's right for themselves and for their children. And so, I wrote my book, and then just recently I launched a trauma bond recovery community called Thrive, because I really wanted to democratize what I do because therapy is so expensive. So for $29.99, you literally get my online course, and you're in a very safe community online with tons of other women in this situation, learning, healing, and growing, because we need each other.
Right. Absolutely. That's amazing. That's awesome.
Yeah. And I've just, they never cease to amaze me. They always impress me. My husband says, I know all your patients are beautiful. I'm like, no, they are.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Lastly, Dr. Nay, where can our listeners find you for more information and resources?
Yeah, so they can see me on Instagram, The Real Dr. Nadine. I post every day. They can go to my website, drnay.com. Please go. You can sign up for my community there. Also, I have tons of free assessments, like pathological lover assessment, trauma bonds assessment, so many free assessments, so many good worksheets. And just come visit, come say hi, and I'm here to help.
Oh, well, that's amazing. We really appreciate your time today. Like I said, the time went so fast, but we've reached the end of our show. We really are thankful to you for joining us to discuss what trauma bonding is.
Listeners, if you or someone you know in the Northeast Florida area is going through or even thinking about divorce, you're not alone. Taking that first step can feel overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. Our newsletter is filled with actionable advice tailored to guide you through this process. By signing up, you'll gain the tools to face the unknown with courage and see if we're the right fit to support you during this life-changing time. Don't wait. Click the link in the show notes, fill out the form, and take the first step toward building a brighter future today.